Welcome to our Introduction to Organic Forages module.
This module was authored by Craig Schaefer, Christine Moncada, and Constance Carlson from the University of Minnesota in 2017 and updated in 2026. Narrated by Constance Carlson, with additional narration generated using the AI voice of Hannah from 11 Labs.
Forages are grasses and legumes that are used for livestock feed. They are naturally suited for diets of ruminants like cattle and sheep that can digest the complex fiber in their stems and leaves. Forages are harvested by grazing livestock or mechanically harvested as hay or silage. We will introduce the use of forages in organic cropping systems and discuss characteristics of grasses, legumes, and grass-legume mixtures that can fit into these systems. Forages are essential to provide nutrients and fiber to diets of livestock. In addition, they provide some unique advantages for organic systems compared to annual small grain and row crops that require tillage. These advantages are most pronounced with perennial forages that, after seeding, maintain stands for several years. Perennial forages provide almost year-round ground cover and protect the soil from erosion. Forages suppress annual and perennial weeds and can deplete the weed seed bank. And legume forages require no nitrogen fertilization and can add nitrogen to the soil for use by subsequent crops. There are several areas we will cover in this section. We will first discuss the morphology of grasses.
Then we will move on to cover cool and warm season grasses, annual and perennial grasses, and end with forage grass species profiles.
This is a mature stand of a perennial grass.
We show a field of a tall green forage grass crop that has seed heads.
Grasses are a widely distributed plant family. Within the family are included forage grasses, but also important grains like corn, wheat, and oat. Some general characteristics of grasses include upright stems during flowering, non-showy vegetative flowers, and a fibrous root system. Many of the forage grasses only flower in the spring, and growth later in the growing season is vegetative and consists only of leaves. The grass stem originates from a crown and supports leaves, and the collective flowers are called an inflorescence. Stems contain nodes and internodes. Grass leaves consist of a blade that is attached to the sheath that surrounds the stem. Some grasses also have horizontal stems called stolons and rhizomes. The sexual parts of grasses are not showy like legumes, but are enclosed in green leaf-like structures that are clustered together in inflorescences.
Here we show pictures of the upright stems of reed canary grass and timothy in the field with their linear-shaped seed heads.
When grasses have stems and associated inflorescences, their forage quality is lower than when they have only leaves and are vegetative. Here is a close-up of the leaf blade and collar region of a perennial grass. Note how leaf blades are attached at the collar. The arrow points to a ligule at the collar region of the grass leaf.
Ligules are membranous structures located at the juncture of leaf sheath and leaf collar.
The final morphological feature of grasses that we will discuss is their root system. Grasses have fibrous root systems that are mostly located within the top foot of soils. These fibrous roots explore the soil for water and nutrients and can add a lot of carbon.
Pictured here are the dense and fibrous masses of roots from a grass plant.
Some grasses like Kentucky bluegrass, smooth brome grass, reed canary grass, and quackgrass spread by underground stems called rhizomes. This is called asexual reproduction and allows grasses to spread and create a sod.
In this picture, We show the cross-section of a parent grass plant that has formed horizontally growing rhizomes, which have formed new plants.
Sod-forming grasses provide soil coverage and soil stability. Grasses that do not spread are called bunch grasses. Examples are orchard grass and perennial ryegrass. Orchard grass is an example of a bunch grass that only spreads by expansion of the original plant. Kentucky bluegrass is a spreading grass that forms a dense sod. Because of its growth habit, Kentucky bluegrass is used in pastures as well as home lawns. Here, an orchard grass plant is surrounded by Kentucky bluegrass.
Shown in this image is a patch of short-growing grasses surrounding one clump of taller grass.
Grasses also differ in terms of their conditions for optimum growth. Two broad categories are cool and warm season grasses.
Here we have a graph showing the general growth patterns of cool season and warm season grasses throughout spring, summer, and autumn.
Cool season grasses make their best growth in spring and fall when air temperatures are low. Warm season make their best growth in summer when air temperatures are high. Cool season grasses also have less drought tolerance than warm season grasses. Here is a picture of Kentucky bluegrass in the spring and summer. Kentucky bluegrass is a cool season grass that grows best in spring and fall when temperatures are cool and soil moisture is adequate. During the summer months, it often becomes dormant and undergoes a summer slump in production.
Shown in the spring picture is Kentucky bluegrass that is green and actively growing in a pasture. In the summer picture, the Kentucky bluegrass has gone dormant and is brownish and not actively growing.
Both annual and perennial forage grasses are used by producers. Perennial grasses are the backbone of many grazing systems, with annual grasses strategically inserted into cropping systems to supply forage needs during certain times of the year. Most forage plants are either annuals or perennials. Annuals complete their life cycle, from seed to flowering and death, in one growing season, while perennials grow for 3 or more years.
The first circular diagram demonstrates the annual growth cycle of seed, vegetative growth, flowering, followed by death to be started again in the spring with seed. The second diagram shows a perennial's growth cycle from seed, vegetative growth, flowering, dormancy, then back to vegetative growth the following year.
There are both annual and perennial grasses within the cool and warm season grass categories.
Cool season. Annual grasses include small grains like spring-seeded wheat, oats, and barley, as well as annual and Italian ryegrass. Warm season. Annual grasses include Sudan grass, teff, millets, and even corn.
Annual grasses will be killed by frost in the winter. Spring-seeded small grains typically will provide only one harvest during the early summer, while ryegrasses will provide multiple harvests. Sudan grass and teff are harvested multiple times during the summer months. Spring oats and annual ryegrass are examples of cool season annual grasses. If oats is used for grazing, it should be grazed while vegetative and harvested before flowering. This table shows the yield potential of annual forages seeded in the early spring and harvested in June and July, and harvested in October.
Annual ryegrass has a spring yield of 1.9 tons per acre and a fall yield of 1.9 tons per acre. Spring oat has a spring yield of 1.7 tons per acre and a fall yield of 1.6 tons per acre. Spring barley has a spring yield of 1.4 tons per acre and a fall yield of 1.4 tons per acre. Spring wheat has a spring yield of 1.4 tons per acre and a fall yield of 1.4 tons per acre. Winter wheat has a spring yield of 1.4 tons per acre and a fall yield of 1.5 tons per acre. The source of this data is Amanda Grev from the University of Minnesota.
This table shows the yield potential of annual forages seeded in late summer and harvested in October.
Winter barley has a fall yield of 2.2 tons per acre. Fall-planted spring oat has a fall yield of 2.9 tons per acre. Winter rye has a fall yield of 1.5 tons per acre. The source of this data is Amanda Grev from the University of Minnesota. In this image, we show strips of forage grasses. The teff in the center has thin, fine leaves and is shorter, while the Sudan grass has thick, coarse leaves and is taller.
Teff, pictured here in the center, and Sudan grass, pictured on the right, are examples of warm season grasses that can be used to supply forage in midsummer. They can be grazed or harvested for hay. Annual ryegrass is growing on the left side of the image. This horse is grazing Sudan grass, a tall-growing warm season grass. When subject to multiple grazings, Sudan grass and teff are among the highest yielding annual grasses. The millets are also warm season grasses, but provide less forage than the other grasses. All of these grasses require manure application to supply 50 to 100 pounds of N per acre. There are many perennial grasses that have been used for forage. Perennials have the advantage of providing continuous ground cover and thus have greater potential to enhance soil health than annuals. Some perennial stands, like those of Kentucky bluegrass, persist for 10 years or more, while those of orchard grass may be shorter-lived due to winter injury. A list of commonly used perennials includes Kentucky bluegrass, smooth brome grass, timothy, orchard grass, tall fescue, and reed canary grass. The importance of each perennial grass varies with environment and region. There are also relatively newer grasses that are being used by producers.
The less traditional grasses include meadow fescue, festuloleum, perennial ryegrass, and meadow bromograss.
They may be less adapted to diverse environments than the previously listed grasses, but they may have unique traits of value to producers. Cool season grasses do not differ greatly in hay yields under ideal growing conditions and with nitrogen fertilization.
In this table of 10 different forage grasses, we show examples of hay yield in tons per acre. Festuloleum is 5.3 tons per acre. Meadow bromegrass is 4.5 tons per acre. Meadow fescue is 5 tons per acre. Orchard grass is 6.4 tons per acre. Perennial ryegrass is 4.7 tons per acre. Reed canary grass is 6.6 tons per acre. Smooth bromegrass is 5.9 tons per acre. Tall fescue is 6.6 tons per acre. Timothy is 5.3 tons per acre. The sources for this data are the University of Wisconsin and University of Minnesota.
Kentucky bluegrass is a low-growing grass that is typically harvested by livestock grazing rather than for hay. Yields are typically 2 to 4 ton per acre. Reed canary grass is an example of a grass that is well adapted to wet conditions. However, it can also be grown under upland condition because it has high yield potential.
In this picture, we show reed canary grass growing next to standing water.
For comparison of yield potential between perennial grasses, note the tall growing reed canary grass surrounded by the shorter stature Kentucky bluegrass.
In this image of a field, reed canary grass is several feet taller than the adjacent Kentucky bluegrass that is under a foot tall.
Forage yield is a function of sward density and height. Therefore, reed canary grass has greater yield potential than Kentucky bluegrass. Now we will take a closer look at 3 important perennial grasses to illustrate their differences.
These include Kentucky bluegrass, orchard grass, and perennial ryegrass.
The origin of the name Kentucky bluegrass is obscure, but is thought to have been related to its early use in Kentucky in the 1700s, and because fields at flowering appear blue. It is widespread throughout the northern United States in lawns and in permanent pastures.
Kentucky bluegrass grows up to 8 to 12 inches tall.
It is very tolerant of close grazing and will persist in closely grazed pastures while tall growing grasses die. Kentucky bluegrass spreads through seed and through rhizomes. It flowers only once in spring and afterwards is vegetative and only leaves grow.
This image shows 3 horses in a pasture. Part of the pasture has been grazed very short, while the other part has foliage that is taller.
Here is an overgrazed horse pasture. In the closely grazed area, only Kentucky bluegrass persists because it tolerates close grazing. Orchard grass is a popular grass for use in mixtures with legumes like alfalfa, or it can be grown in pure stands for grazing.
It is a bunch grass that forms clumps. Orchard grass grows 3 to 4 feet tall. It is spring flowering and its regrowth is leafy.
It has only moderate winter hardiness and is susceptible to winter injury. Its name is derived from its ability to tolerate shading, such as found under trees in orchards. Here is a clump of orchard grass in an old pasture in the spring. It is surrounded by a mixture of white clover and Kentucky bluegrass.
This picture shows a close-up of a pasture with a clump of orchard grass in the center that is taller than the adjacent mixture of white clover and bluegrass.
Orchard grass is a bunch-type grass that tends to remain in a clump after establishment and does not spread much. But during some winters, orchard grass can suffer winter injury. Winter-injured orchard grass is on the right side of the photograph, compared to tall fescue on the left.
The photo shows 2 grassy plots. The plot on the left is greener with grass that appears to be actively growing. The plot on the right has very little green and has mostly dead brown foliage.
Winter-injured plants often have only a portion of the plant damaged. The surviving part can regrow with limited yield potential. Here is a mature perennial ryegrass plant.
The picture shows a small clump of grass with shiny leaf blades.
Perennial ryegrass is a bunch-type grass that can be used for grazing or haying.
It grows 2 to 3 feet tall. Perennial ryegrass flowers in the spring, and its regrowth is leafy.
It has a higher forage quality than most cool season grasses. Perennial ryegrass lacks winter hardiness and will suffer winter kill in the Midwest during cold winters without snow cover. It is a good grass to use in mixture with legumes like alfalfa and white clover. It is recognized by its shiny leaves.
Here we show a picture of many rectangular-shaped plots, each with plants growing of a single grass species. The 2 plots that are labeled perennial ryegrass have much weaker vegetative growth compared to the other plots where the grasses are growing more thickly.
A perennial ryegrass stand damaged by winter injury. It is surrounded by stands of tall fescue and meadow fescue. Forage legumes belong to the legume family, which includes grain legumes like soybean and dried beans, vegetable legumes like green beans and peas, as well as forage legumes like alfalfa and white clover.
In this section, we will discuss legume morphology, annual and perennial legumes, and the profiles of several forage legumes.
Legumes have several unique characteristics. These include seed-borne in pods, showy flowers, compound leaves, biological nitrogen fixation, and seed and foliage rich in protein and taproots. Here we see a mature plant of soybeans, a legume grown for grain production.
The figure is a botanical line drawing of a soybean plant labeled with roots, root nodule, pod, leaf, leaflet, and stem.
Note the seed borne in pods as well as the compound leaves.
The compound leaf of a soybean plant consists of 3 leaflets. This image shows a close-up of the clusters of the yellow, pea-like flowers of bird's foot trefoil and the groupings of the long, slender seed pods.
Here are the yellow flowers and seed pods of bird's foot trefoil. Note that the seed pods originate from a single point and actually do look like a bird's foot. Within the seed pods are small seeds.
In this series of images, we have close-ups of the flowers of 3 different plants. The first is of the flower heads of red clover, which are pinkish in color. The next 2 plants are different types of alfalfa. One has clusters of dark purple flowers, and the other has clusters of yellow flowers.
Here are the flowers of red clover and alfalfa. Individual flowers of red clover are grouped together in an inflorescence called a head, while the flowers of alfalfa are grouped together in a raceme. Alfalfa flowers are typically purple, but can also be yellow and white. Legumes have compound leaves with variable numbers and arrangements of leaflets.
This botanical line drawing shows the compound leaves of sweet clover with its 3 leaflets, bird's foot trefoil with its 5 leaflets, Cura clover with 3 leaflets, and crown vetch and hairy vetch with variable numerous leaflets.
True clovers like Cura clover and white clover have palmately trifoliate, whereas legumes like bird's foot trefoil and crown vetch have 5 or more leaflets. Legumes have a taproot system that contrasts to the fibrous root system of grasses. Here we see the taproot system of a mature alfalfa plant.
The image shows a thick main root with a few side-branching roots.
Also, alfalfa and other legumes form a branching crown, which is the site of the crown bud formation. Legumes like alfalfa can conduct biological nitrogen fixation and, in contrast to grasses, require no nitrogen fertilizers. Biological nitrogen fixation occurs in root nodules.
In this photo, we show a red clover taproot with several thinner side root hairs. The round growths are the nodules.
The nodules are attached to root hairs. Some legumes have specialized reproductive structures. White clover spreads by horizontal above-ground stems called stolons, while Cura clover spreads by underground stems called rhizomes. Shown in this photo are rhizomes.
The rhizomes are whitish and look similar to roots, but are actually stem tissue.
When we discussed grasses, we focused on important annual and perennial forages. There are also annual and perennial forage legumes that can be used in organic cropping systems. Berseem and crimson clover are examples of annual clovers. In southern regions, they are used as winter annuals where they are planted in the fall and mature in the spring. In northern regions, they can be planted in the early spring and harvested or used as green manure crop in the summer.
In these pictures, we show a field of crimson clover with many red flower heads and a close-up of berseem clover with its white and brownish flower heads.
There is also a biennial legume called sweet clover. Biennials grow vegetatively in the seeding year and do not flower. After overwintering, biennials regrow, flower, and die in the second year. Sweet clover is a tall, growing legume that has both yellow and white forms. Sweet clover is primarily used as a green manure crop and is plowed down to add nutrients to the soil.
In these images, we show a close-up of the yellow flower inflorescences of sweet clover and a field of sweet clover that is being plowed down.
Red clover and alfalfa are both perennial forage legumes. They are particularly important crops for organic systems in our region. Next, we will review legumes that can be used in organic cropping systems and provide detailed profiles of some important legumes.
These include alfalfa, Alsica clover, bird's foot trefoil, Sicer milk vetch, crown vetch, Cura clover, red clover, and white clover.
In the northern region of the United States, perennial legumes are used to a greater extent than annual legumes. There are several perennial legumes that have been or are currently used for forage. Of these, alfalfa, white clover, and red clover are the most frequently grown, while others are grown in special circumstances or as components of mixtures that we will discuss later. Legumes vary greatly in their forage yield potential.
In this table with data from the University of Minnesota, we show potential typical yields of legume forages. Alfalfa can have a hay yield of 12.7 tons per acre. Bird's foot trefoil is 4.5. Scyther milk vetch is 5. Crown vetch is 6.4. Kura clover is 4.7. Red clover is 8.3, and white clover is 2.5 tons per acre of hay. We will profile perennial forage legumes that include alfalfa, red clover, white clover, and Kura clover, a relatively new legume with unique properties.
Alfalfa is the most widely grown forage legume in the Midwest. It is a crown-forming plant that grows 2 to 3 feet tall. It is harvested as hay or silage and sometimes grazed. During a growing season, alfalfa will have 3 to 4 regrowth cycles that each culminate in flowering and harvest. Alfalfa is used as a rotation crop to supply end to subsequent crops in rotation. Stands typically last from 3 to 4 years. As noted previously, alfalfa is the primary hay legume used by farmers. Here is a field of alfalfa being cut and placed in windrows by a farmer. When hay in windrows dries to less than 20% moisture, it will be harvested by a baler. There are numerous varieties of alfalfa marketed. Producers should select varieties with sufficient winter hardiness to survive in their farming environments.
In this photo, we show 2 varieties of alfalfa in side-by-side plots. The plot on the left is not winter hardy and has sparse growth with plants that are half dead. The plot on the right is winter hardy and has dense growth of the alfalfa plants.
On the left is a variety that lacked sufficient winter hardiness to survive in Minnesota during a winter with minimum snow cover. Red clover is a crown-forming legume that has been traditionally used as a hay crop when harvested 2 or 3 times per growing season.
It can also be used for grazing. Red clover grows from 2 to 3 feet tall.
Its advantage relative to alfalfa is its tolerance to soils of low soil pH or high acidity and its high seedling vigor. However, it is subject to diseases and winter injury, and stands typically last only 2 to 3 years. Red clover is more prone to winter injury than alfalfa.
We show a picture of 2 plots of forage legumes. One is red clover and is mostly dead and weedy, while the other is alfalfa and has more vegetative growth.
On the left, we see a very damaged red clover stand, while on the right, alfalfa has little damage. The picture was taken in the spring from a 2-year-old stand harvested 3 times the previous year and without a fall cutting. White clover is an ideal legume to use in pasture grazing situations.
It grows from 6 to 8 inches tall.
It is unique in that plants spread by seed and also by above-ground stems called stolons. Plants usually persist for 1 to 2 years, but stands can be sustained through reseeding. Kura clover is a relatively new forage legume for northern regions.
It grows from 8 to 12 inches tall.
It is the most persistent forage legume because it has a large crown and spreads through underground stems called rhizomes.
The stands can last 10 years or longer.
Kura is an ideal grazing legume because it tolerates a diversity of grazing pressures. However, it can be challenging to establish.
This is because it has very poor seedling vigor.
For many hay and grazing situations, grasses are grown together in mixture with legumes. Here is a complex mixture containing red clover, white clover, bird's foot trefoil, and several perennial grasses.
The image shows forage grasses growing together with forage legumes that have white, yellow, and pink flowers.
There are several advantages of mixtures, including enhanced resource use because of differing root structure and plant architecture, and greater ground cover, resulting in resistance to weed invasion, protection of legume crowns from hoof and machinery traffic, as well as protection of plants from winter injury. Additional benefits are that legumes can replace the need to supply N fertilizer to grasses because legumes can transfer biologically fixed N, while grasses and mixtures can reduce the incidence of legume bloat caused by clovers. Finally, mixing of grasses with legumes will increase the rate of hay drying because cut grasses dry faster than more succulent legumes. There are several theories about the composition of forage mixtures. Some marketed mixtures contain 10 or more species that will likely not compete well with other plant types in the mixture. Consequently, that seed is wasted in the field. However, with good knowledge of fields, climate, and forage management, growers can be more selective in what to seed and ultimately maximize their yield potentials. Mixtures provide many advantages, but mixture formulation should start with a foundational legume and grass that best fits the farm. Then add other grasses, legumes, or forbs that complement the foundational species. Here are some example mixtures for haymaking with recommended seeding rates per acre.
A mixture for 3 to 4 hay cuts per growing season could be 10 pounds alfalfa, 4 pounds orchard grass, 6 pounds tall fescue, and 6 pounds perennial ryegrass or meadow fescue. A mixture for 2 to 3 hay cuts per growing season could be 10 pounds alfalfa or 8 pounds red clover and 4 pounds orchard grass or 8 pounds smooth brome grass.
Of course, mixtures can be diversified by adding a small amount of other grasses or legumes. Shown here are several examples.
The first option to diversify the legume component of a mixture is to add 2 pounds of red clover or alsike clover to alfalfa grass mixtures. Another option is to add 2 pounds of alsike or white clover to red clover grass mixtures. To diversify the grass component, add 2 pounds of orchard grass, tall fescue, or perennial ryegrass to alfalfa grass mixtures. Another option is to add 2 pounds each of timothy, orchard grass, or perennial ryegrass to red clover grass mixtures.
For pastures, mixture recommendations include plant species that have tolerance to grazing. Here is an example mixture for a pasture.
For the legume part, 3 pounds white clover with 3 pounds bird's foot trefoil or 8 pounds alfalfa. For the grass part, 4 pounds orchard grass, 5 pounds meadow fescue, and 3 pounds Kentucky bluegrass.
This module has been a general introduction to forage plants, their identification, and their use in organic systems. In the next Forages module, we will discuss harvesting and storage.
This project is supported by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, National Institute of Food and Agriculture, Organic Transitions Program under Award Number 2013-5, 1106-2, 1005. This project is supported by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Agricultural Marketing Service, National Organic Program under the Transition to Organic Partnership Program, TOPP, in the Midwest region. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this publication are those of the authors and should not be construed to represent any official USDA or U.S. government determination or policy. The University of Minnesota shall provide equal access to and opportunity in its programs, facilities, and employment without regard to race, color, creed, religion, national origin, gender, age, marital status, familial status, disability, public assistance status, membership or activity in a local commission created for the purpose of dealing with discrimination, veteran status, sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. For more information about this project, please see organicag.umn.edu, copyright 2026, Regents of the University of Minnesota. All rights reserved.